Good evening. My name is Maneesh Goyal. I'm a general partner over at Virgin Health Ventures. We're an early stage technology fund focused on the healthcare market. We focus on three main areas: consumer health, data analytics on top of the healthcare information that's being digitized right now, and then finally non-invasive and minimally invasive medical devices. Today I'm going to concentrate on the consumer health side, dabbling a little into the data side. A little bit of context. The reason I got into this industry or this vertical is mostly because we have a rather large problem in this country with regards to healthcare. Somewhere on the order of 20% of our gross domestic product goes into healthcare and healthcare services. And that is, if we don't do anything, going to go to 40% in the next 10 years. And that's just not sustainable. You can't spend 40% of your income in healthcare. That, and in conjunction with broader demographic changes that are going on in the U.S., is cause for concern. We've got an aging baby boomer population that's going to be not only coming out of the job market, but they're going to be taking resources to retire and to tap into the healthcare system. Secondly, we have a system in the U.S. that spends nearly twice as much as any developed country on healthcare per person per year. And as you can see on the right-hand side, for no real benefit. We're equivalent to Chile that spends 1/10 of our dollar amounts on what we get out of it with respect to life expectancy. And then finally, the number of people, the percentage of the U.S. population that is considered either overweight or obese, clinically obese, as measured by body measure, BMI, is at epidemic levels. So to me, this represents a scale problem on the top left-hand side, a cost problem on the right-hand side, and a consumer disengagement problem on the bottom. And the only way that I believe we can really solve this, and the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing, is through technology. Services cannot solve this problem. It's an information problem. It's an information asymmetry problem that exists in the healthcare world. So to add a little bit more information to it, consumers last year spent $200 billion out of pocket on healthcare. For the most part, who pays for healthcare? It's our employers, our government. And really, we put about 10% of the spending. But that's going up. And it's going up to $500 billion over the next couple of years. And that's driven by the concept of high deductible insurance. That's insurance that is somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 coming out of pocket, first coming out of pocket. And to tell you, last year was 20%. It's going to be 30% this year. 3 years ago was at 0%. So employers are figuring out that they need to spend less on healthcare and have consumers be more engaged in that economic transaction. So how do you do that? My background is in systems engineering, and to me, this is an information and systems engineering problem. If you think about our health, what happens is we go along living life as we normally do, doing things that are some things that are good for our bodies, some things that are detrimental for our bodies. And at some point, we get some diagnostic feedback that says you might want to change something. It could be a cancer diagnosis, it could be a high cholesterol diagnosis, diabetes diagnosis. And that forces a change in behavior. But that feedback mechanism, the delay in that system, is roughly on the order of decades. And so the question is, can technology use to reduce that delay? And if we can get there, then I think we can reduce the cost in the system and get to the holy grail of medicine, which is asymptomatic medicine, which is getting ahead of the problem before it surfaces. And one of the ways to do this is through applications. We carry these devices around everywhere we go. They're surrogates of our body in many respects. They are constantly aware of what we're doing, how much we're moving around. Every 2 years, a new sensor is added into a cell phone. And if you think about what those sensors are capable of now. We've seen app companies that use a cell phone as a pedometer, as a glucometer, and that data that's collected can be used and analyzed to change behavior. So one of the things I was asked to talk about some of the interesting apps that are in the market, and there are over 13,000 health-related apps just in the iOS platform. So getting yourself above the fray is fairly difficult. But I see the healthcare app system as two distinct entities. One that has clinical value that ultimately needs to either go through the FDA for approval, needs to be, that needs to interact with the physician, and one that has consumer value and that's more wellness-based. And on the wellness side, you've got this whole quantified self movement, which is measuring everything about you, looking at what you're doing and what you're not doing, and giving you feedback along those lines. And Fitbit is a classic example. I bet about 10% of you have a Fitbit or some equivalent device. And what the Fitbit is a little pedometer that you put on yourself, and it gives you feedback on how many steps you've taken every day. Along the fitness side, you've got companies like Runkeeper that allow you to measure how far you run and then share that information with your friends. One of the most interesting apps is on the behavior side. This was T2 is a mood tracking app that was sponsored by the Army and is actually released in the market. You can download it, and it just every now and then asks you what your mood is like, and it then gives you a trend line. And when you see that mood pattern, it's actually kind of interesting. And you can but so I mean it's a valuable information because self-assessment is a very difficult thing to do, and I think the value of having long-term data on what you do and when you do it is how you make change. And of course, the diet and food app is an interesting space. One of the companies we've invested in, it allows you to take a photo of your food and share it with your friends, actually any users of the app. And what's interesting about that is then your friends rate whether it's healthy or not, which has direct feedback. 2 months after they released the application, they had over 7 million food items rated with their geolocations as well as metadata around them. So if you think about the value of that data, so if you walk into a restaurant, if you know the top 5 healthy apps rated by the community, it's worth something, right? On the clinical side is actually where I think is the most interesting state of development. I think the consumers got a little ways to go in terms of carrying. I'll go into that in a little bit. AliveCore is an interesting company. Basically, they have a case for your phone that essentially turns the phone into an ECG. And you can put it over your shirt or under your shirt. And what it does is it tracks your ECG and shoots it off to your cardiologist. So if you think about anybody that is at risk for arrhythmia, it's actually very useful because if something happens, you can actually get that information at that very moment versus wait 10, 20, 30, or an hour later. Health information is where I think we can actually reduce costs. About 30% of the $2.5 trillion we spend on healthcare is wasted because people go to the emergency room instead of going to their general practitioner. So if you can get into that, decision point where somebody says, I need to go to the emergency room, and say, you might not necessarily need to. You can save a considerable cost in the system. So I've seen dozens of companies that are doing just that. And iTriage is essentially that. It allows you to enter a bunch of symptoms and actually get some feedback on what you should do. These guys were acquired by Aetna last year. Teladoc is a telecare solution where you can actually use phone as well as online computer to get access to a physician at $38 a session. So think about all your co-pays being much more than that. You can have, and not having to wait in a room, wait for an appointment. You can get a physician immediately. Finally, on the disease management side, going back to waste. So 40% of our dollars in healthcare are going to chronic conditions, and getting ahead of that in terms of managing diabetics, glucose intake or their diet, or a heart patients managing their diet can be very valuable. So company WaveSense has a very cool product in the glucometer space. And I just got my 1-minute warning, so I'm going to go real quick. Opportunities. This is a fairly complex slide to kind of go over quickly, but we see the patient as sitting in the middle of the perfect storm between the whole concept of social, mobile, and cloud computing as applied to healthcare. And the platform, these 3 or 4 things that are going on in the technology world are disrupting healthcare in many ways that the companies that I just mentioned are. So I labeled this on consumer engagement because I think it's very important to engage the consumer and to give them more information in a timely manner. But there's clinical value as well in either using mobile device to do dose adjustment, dynamic dose adjustment, or drug adherence. 20% of patients don't take their drugs and they're not effective. So if you can actually monitor and provide feedback, it actually has much better value for the system than having them be seen in an acute condition. This is a nice chart. It just shows all the various ways that one can measure the body and all the companies that are coming out with solutions in the space. It's an eye chart, so I'm going to skip through it. There's a couple of different things that I want to leave you with. The opportunities, I think, are around passive data collection. Consumers are not going to enter information. The data has to self-collect, so it has to be sensors, much like the previous slide, or in ways that it just tells you what you're doing versus you having to interact with it. And then the second opportunity is to make sense of that data. Okay, so you've got terabytes or petabytes of clinical data. How do we make information out of that? So the classic example of this is Watson, the IBM initiative around taking research data, clinical data, and giving some meaningful clinical output out of that. But certainly there are smaller scale projects that are going on. The final opportunities, these are the big guys. The insurance companies are the ones that hold all the cards in the system. And they haven't really made their bets. They're starting to dabble in this space in terms of the app space, but none of them have really converted wholly into using apps as their frontline mechanism. I think that is probably the furthest ahead with their iTriage buy, but for the most part, they haven't jumped in. So I think it's an opportunity from an entrepreneur standpoint. I think there are a couple of challenges ahead. Who's the buyer? Who's the consumer? That's always been the problem with healthcare. We as patients are the consumers of the good, but the payer's been always somebody else. As that comes into alignment, I think that problem will be solved, but it's a challenge to any startup or an app company faces right now. And then certainly getting your app noticed in the 13,000 app world is fairly difficult. And then it's questionable whether the traditional consumer internet strategies around virality, around user interface, as well as game mechanics will work in the healthcare space because of the litany of privacy issues, as well as people's just own fear of letting that information out. And then one of the last things is, do consumers care about their health? It's a good question. I think until the economics change, and they're slowly changing, consumers are still pretty ambivalent about it. We want to live our lives the way we want to live our lives. We don't want a computer or a physician telling us how to live it. So I think that's changing, but at the same time, it's still got a ways to go. So the bottom line, nobody owns the market right now. It's still a wide open game. To me, this is how I see apps. Apps are the conduit for data collection. They're used to create information, but they're not the solution in of themselves. And that's what I'm going to leave you with.